I just recently finished writing, at least the first version, what I think is going to be the best way of building the Blood Lance guide for Maxroll. That's going to undergo revision, and after it gets done, that'll be posted. But I wanted to get this out ahead of that because I know people have been asking, how do I expect to play Blood Lance walking in to Season 1? So I'm going to include the link to this build guide that I have in the Maxroll D4 planner down below. You can just check it out if you want. I'll also have timestamps to all the different sections in case you want to check those out individually, in case you do like the visual and the audio learning as opposed to just reading it yourself. And then as a quick disclaimer, I am going to be talking about the different options for the Malignant Hearts that I think should be good with the build, as long as everything works with overpower in the way that you would expect. But without further ado, let's start with the gear. Then we'll go into skill tree and then Paragon tree, and the Paragon tree looks ridiculous, but this is how you have to build it when you play Blood Lance. Using Disobedience still, obviously this was nerfed, it's still the best option for armor, and then we want maximum life, armor, cooldown reduction, in willpower. On the armor, maximum life, total armor, you're going to be seeing a lot of this throughout the rest of our gear, and then any forms of damage reduction which are valuable. We can also heavily rely on damage reduction while fortified, because Blood Lance builds and blood builds in general on the Necromancer can successfully fortify at a very high rate. And then in addition to that, we're summoning a ton of blood orbs to benefit from the new aspect, but we'll get to that in just a second. And we're also using Blood Drinker in the Paragon. So we're basically healing and fortifying 100% of the time. So damage reduction while fortified is actually a useful stat on this build. And then for the aspect, there are a lot of different options that you could put on here for either utility or defense. I do think that Protector, just having another source of barrier up on the build in addition to Shielding Storm down below, is very valuable. Because when you are fortified, that also reduces the incoming damage that your barrier takes, and when you take damage to barrier, you don't lose your fortified status. On top of that, barrier means we're not taking damage to our life, and since overpower deals damage based off of our current life and current fortify, being able to protect that with as many layers of defensives as possible is ultimately our most important goal for maximizing DPS. For the gloves, we have increase to attack speed, overpower damage itself, lucky hit chance to be able to restore resource, and then lucky hit chance. Then we obviously have the addition of Gore Quills, the new aspect that really sets off Blood Lance to finally have enough tools to be able to shine. The two things that you need to know about this right now is one, Gore Quills is also currently bugged. So if you don't also have the Hungry Blood aspect, it's bugged and it actually causes all of the lances to become blocked by monsters for whatever reason. Hopefully that is fixed very early into the season, but you need Hungry Blood if you're using Gore Quills. You would always use them both together anyways, but people were noticing a very weird interaction when they didn't have both of them. The only thing that I really need to test, because the game just won't give me a Gore Quills aspect, is whether or not the damage reduction from this aspect reduces the overpower damage as well. Historically, anything that says that your Blood Lance either does more or less damage actually does not apply to the overpower damage in any way, shape, or form. That's why I'm guessing that's fine to put it onto the gloves here. Even if it wasn't, it's still a really hard argument to remove Rathma's Chosen from the amulet, but we'll touch on that in a quick second. For the pants, we have maximum life, armor, ranks to Blood Mist, which this one is a little nebulous here, and the damage reduction while fortified. The reason why you don't necessarily need ranks to Blood Mist is because we are running Decrepify, we are going to lucky hit and reduce cooldowns quite often, as well as already using Explosive Mist on the kit. So there's a world where you don't need the ranks here. That being said, Blood Mist off of cooldown more quickly means that we can proactively use it to apply damage to small packs as well as single targets when we have Rathma's Vigor up to apply automatic overpower on the skill, because it does a ton of damage. If it turns out that the cooldown reduction is just not necessary here at all, then you would just put more damage reduction on this slot. We're also using Shielding Storm. Again, just Bone Storm, just a phenomenal skill. Bone Storm is definitely one of the things here where it's like, you don't need this on the build technically, but it says damage reduction and generates a barrier, and that's kind of good enough. On top of that, it does give us crit chance, which may or may not interact with one of the new Malignant Hearts really well. I'll touch on that in a second. But as a source of damage reduction and great barrier generation, Shielding Storm just cannot be beat. On the boots, we have movement speed, essence cost reduction, as well as ranks to corpse tendrils, and then willpower. Willpower is the stat that actually directly modifies how much overpower damage that you do. So if you're going for a maximum damage build, you actually want willpower and all stats on as many gear pieces as you possibly can get them. We're using Ghost Walker so that our Blood Mist 1 just does not reduce our movement speed at all and instead gains us 5% movement speed while we're in it. And then for 4 seconds after it, we get the 25% movement speed buff. There is also the new legendary aspect that makes it so that you run away from monsters who are slowed and chilled faster. You can use that with Decrepify to get a little bit of movement boost. I think ultimately, at least on the majority of Necromancer builds, that's a little bit too memey to really rely on it, but it might be great in PvP. For the weapon, and in general for overpower, you literally don't care about the weapon damage at all. So the lucky hit chance is phenomenal for restoring our resource and generating fortify. And then we want overpower and all stats. These are actually the only stats that benefit us. I also tossed on intelligence because at least that gets you a little bit of all resistance. And then ultimate skill damage so that our Bone Storm is slightly more relevant. For the amulet, Tides of Blood is the best option. Obviously you can go with Coalesced Blood as well for more multiplicative damage. And then percentage willpower, total armor, and essence cost reduction. Movement speed is also a great option on here. There are a ton of great options on here. These are just like the best stats out of all of them. Here's where we have Rathma's Chosen, and it's why it's so important. It will get us that 50% increase, so we gain 75% attack speed for 4 seconds after we overpower. Attack speed is by and large the strongest stat on a Blood Lance build because it means more lances per second, meaning more iterations of that damage applying to every single target per lance monster per lance that hits. On top of that, it also increases our essence regeneration when we're using Hemorrhage, which also means it increases how many blood orbs that we spawn during that time, meaning that when we do cast Blood Lance again, our Gore Quills is going to proc off of more total blood orbs. So without question, Rathma's Chosen is absolutely the most important aspect for the build as far as its overall functionality once you get past Gore Quills and Hungry Blood, and that's why we put it up here. So if Gore Quills or Hungry Blood ends up being a massive detractor from overall overpower damage, because it is reducing the base skill damage as well, we could consider moving it to the amulet. I'm not sold on the fact that we have to do that at this point because more lances per second is just more total overpower damage, but it's something that I need to take a look at and will ultimately make a decision on once we have that testing in place. And then I'm using Caged Heart of Revenge here. Caged Heart of Revenge just seems like it's going to be used on every single build. It says 20% damage reduction. Now, if it actually caps, like it can't keep absorbing damage until you use one of these skills, it's going to be a little bit less auto include. But if it literally just reduces incoming damage by 20%, this is going to drastically help to offset the total amount of damage reduction that builds have lost walking into Season 1. For the rings, maximum life, overpower, lucky hit chance, and resource generation, I'm using Umbral on this ring, and then what I currently have socketed into it is the Heart of the Malignant Pact. Malignant Pact is just great. You gain attack speed, or you have a chance to restore all of your essence, or you gain barrier. All three things that Blood Lance absolutely loves. I definitely think that this one is an auto-include, no question. And then for our second ring, we actually are using Grasping Veins. Now keep in mind, Grasping Veins critical damage multiplier actually also applies to overpower for whatever reason. So having this on our build means that one, we do just crit a little bit more, which again might be relevant depending on what like Malignant Hearts that you're using. But you also get this 1.4 multiplier for our overpower damage, which is one of the few sources of multipliers that we can possibly get. And then Heart of the Barber is a little bit more suspect here. Let me explain to you my reasoning for why we would include it. I believe how this works is once you successfully crit onto a target, it begins storing up all damage over 4 seconds. And then at the end, bare minimum, we get a 44% damage increase to all damage the target would have taken. This means that every single time that Blood Lance procs across multiple monsters, it should also take that damage and multiply it. And on top of that, we're actually able to crit fairly often. And the majority of Blood Lance's rotation is mostly setup. So if we could actually just toss in a couple Blood Lances knowing that it's going to actually multiply to a rate that is like big enough to be able to kill the monsters, we can stop Blood Lancing earlier than we normally would, save a bunch of resource, and then also rely a bit more on that AoE damage to clear up the rest of the fight for us. This might be a huge total increase in efficiency for farming for Blood Lance builds, but this requires a significant amount of testing, and not only that, I see this Malignant Heart being the most likely to get deactivated at the start of the season, because there are so many questions that go into this. One, does it deal the damage to the target or just surrounding targets, meaning it's completely useless for single target damage? Two, what does it do to the damage? Does it create a new source of damage that is neither an overpower, crit, vulnerable, or base damage? And then can that crit? Can you apply overpower to that? Does it continue to read the source of the damage, i.e. the skill that was used to do it? Or is it just a new complete source of damage? None of these things you can intuit from how the actual description on the heart is. And I'm generally concerned it's just going to bork the entire server. So I wouldn't be surprised if this got turned off very quickly, and then we would just slot in any of the other generally good hearts that you happen to come across until we can make sure that this thing actually works for the build. For the shield, and the shield is actually the best damage value for a Blood Lance build because shield can roll plus to maximum life and a focus cannot. So maximum life, resource gen, chance to restore essence, and then essence cost reduction. You can also put 3 sources of damage reduction on this in addition to the maximum life for a total maximum tankiness build. And then I'm currently using Explosive Mist to again help drive down that cooldown for Blood Mist. If that's not necessary, you just put another survivability or defensive aspect here. But as it stands right now, I do think that we ultimately need as much cooldown reduction as possible, considering they also nerf the stat across the board. And then for all of our armor and weapons and shield, we want to socket rubies. And then into our amulets and rings, obviously we can't socket skulls, but you would put skulls in the beginning before you have Malignant Heart to be able to socket into it. For the skill tree, Hemorrhage up into Acolyte's Hemorrhage, we're only putting a single point into Blood Lance, up into Supernatural Blood Lance. Oddly enough, Imperfectly Balanced does increase Blood Lance's damage, but core skill damage doesn't. I also don't understand how that works, but 3 points here, and then 3 points into Hewed Flesh. Being able to proactively cast a Blood Lance and have a corpse to be able to cast Corpse Tendrils on is very valuable. And there's just kind of nowhere else to put these points to get a bigger bonus out of it. I'm personally maxing Blood Mist and then running up to Ghastly Blood Mist to be able to generate a corpse. We don't really need to worry about Blood Mist fortifies. We fortify more than enough. And on top of that, Blood Mist cooldown is further reduced when we overpower. Again, this might be overkill, but especially with the nerf to cooldown reduction, I'd rather Blood Mist be off cooldown a little bit faster than we need it than Blood Mist not be off of cooldown. Death's Embrace for the damage reduction, and then Decrepify down to a Portent Decrepify for all the great things that that does, and then as one of the only options for actually increasing our damage from Amplified Damage. On top of that, it's going to activate one of our Paragon Glyphs to get even more damage against the target. I currently have our remainder points into Corpse Tendrils, that's 4 total skill ranks, and then we're going up to Blood Orbs. Remember, vulnerable doesn't matter for the build, and the Blood Orbs actively increase both our survivability, our damage output, and our ability to spawn more Blood Lances. Only 1 point into Gruesome Mending. Who needs to heal? Honestly, we are going to be permanently at max life, and then maxing out the rest of the 3 good blood passives here. 3 points into Inspiring Leader for the attack speed, because that's very valuable for us, and then 3 points into Standalone, as well as Memento Mori. Memento Mori is actually one of our biggest overall scalers, because we have the sacrifice to be able to gain additional overpower multiplicative damage, and this directly scales that. And then obviously we're building into Bone Storm, and it's 2 great passives. Lastly, we are taking Rathma's Vigor. Here's a very important thing to understand about Rathma's Vigor. In our Paragon boards, we're going to have a Paragon node that says your guaranteed overpower procs gain 50% damage multiplier. Rathma's Vigor makes it so that your blood skills will overpower if you're healthy for 12 seconds, which we are nearly all of the time, but it doesn't count as a guaranteed proc, so it doesn't actually gain that additional damage. So Blood Mist will not deal an additional 1.5 times multiplier from our Paragon board. I have submitted this as a bug. The devs know that it's been submitted as a bug. Hopefully this is something that will be resolved, especially in season 1 when blood builds are really trying to kick off here. With our skill tree, we're going to be using Hemorrhage, Blood Lance, Decrepify, Corpse Tendrils, Bone Storm, and Blood Mist on our skill bar. We are sacrificing Defenders because none of the other stats matter to us at all. We're sacrificing Bone Skeletal Mages for the overpower damage, and then we're sacrificing Blood Golem for the additional maximum life. You could also do Bone Golem for the attack speed. I don't think one is strictly better or worse than the other. Once you have all of your increased attack speed bonuses going, it's definitely going to feel like you should have Blood Golem sacrificed, but I definitely think, especially in the early game, sacrificing Bone Golem might not be a terrible option for you. And then for the Paragon boards, you can kind of just take a snapshot of this. Obviously you can zoom in yourself, but I just want to very quickly talk about why we're using each individual glyph. And if you go and look at all of the nodes that we're picking up, you'll notice that we're basically avoiding damage whenever we can because it does nothing for us, and we're picking up maximum life wherever we can. But on starter board, we're putting Blood Drinker. Blood Drinker says a bonus to the magical nodes within range. That means that we can buff up our willpower nodes within range, and you'll also notice them trying to maximize picking up willpower whenever possible as I'm pathing through, since this directly scales our overpower damage. But on top of that, we also get Blood Orbs fortify us. So not only will Blood Orbs heal us, and when they are consumed by Gore Quills, it seems to activate everything that says when consuming a Blood Orb. So that's pretty awesome. We'll also get that additional fortify, so we'll just permanently maintain our fortify every single combat engagement. On Bloodbath, we are using control. Now, the damage to crowd control targets does not matter at all. What does matter, though, is the additional bonus that says that you deal additional 10% multiplicative damage to monsters who are slowed, so that procs off of decrep, or instead you deal 20% multiplicative damage to monsters who are stunned, which procs off of corpse tendrils. Coming down to Powerhouse, this is one of the small places where you can actually get overpower damage. Ironically enough, the damage while healthy does not matter at all, but that overpower damage is incredibly valuable for us. Pathing over into Bone Graft, we actually go down to Reinvigorate because we want that maximum essence and essence on kill. This is a great way for us to maintain our essence orb, and you might not think that it's super important since we're not a bone build, but we are even hungrier than a bone build. And then because we are in this board, we're actually going to pick up Amplify. Again, we don't care about any of the magical nodes other than the willpower to get the biggest boost out of that as possible, but enemies that are affected by our curses take additional damage from us, and that works with overpower. We also come down here over to Tenacity to gain the additional maximum life and armor nodes. And then we actually path into Blood Begets Blood in two different directions. First, we're going to come up over to here to get the maximum life from Vampiric with the maximum life magic nodes. And then we're actually going to drop in Sacrificial, another magic node bonus, although this one is actually important because while the Blood Empowered rare node says damage after picking up a Blood Orb and intelligence, they actually have overpower nodes around here. I actually think that this is like just wrong and not supposed to be where it is. But you put a magic node buff here to get the biggest total bonus of overpower that you possibly can. And then we also come up over here to Aggression by coming in through the other side from Scent of Death to be able to pick up an overpower rare node and then the overpower magic nodes next to it as well. Pathing into Scent of Death, this is where we're going to put Dominate. Dominate is our overpower scaling rare glyph, so we want to max out willpower as much as we can, and then it also says that after you overpower an enemy, all damage that they take from you is increased. When a monster takes increased damage, that increases our overpower damage against them. And then we pick up Death Marked just to be able to pick up the willpower nodes around it as well. We go up to Scent of Death because at the very least, Scent of Death's damage reduction works, but oddly enough, the damage bonus when corpses around does not work for our build, but we're also able to path over here to pick up the last magic and rare node that we can for maximum life. Thank you very much for listening to this ramble. Again, I'm going to include the link to this build down below so you can try to build into it along with me. Again, experimentation might lead me to do different innovations where I move some stuff around. So if you show this and then you come back to it later and it has different aspects, or once the Maxroll guide is up, it has been iterated on, please don't be upset. We're all going to be testing things as we walk into season 1. And if I could have all these tools available to me right now, including the Malignant Hearts, I would have tested it until I had every single thing like permanently perfected and actually tested. I just cannot do that right now because I don't currently exist in the future, and I promise you that I will do my best to get updated as quickly as possible so that you don't lose out on any of those innovations or waste any of your resources. But again, I hope that this video helps at the very least give you a track or an idea of how I'm personally going to be building the Blood Lance Necromancer. If you want to try it out yourself, let me know down in the comments or join in the Discord. Let me know if you come up with any really cool innovations, or if you go like, hey, this thing's bugged, it's not working, whatever. We need to be on top of this just so we can help guide people as much as possible. So please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.